And today we're going to just do a quick rapid fire Friday fire on a question that I got recently, but it's also Becca's wheelhouse in terms of what should I take if I'm on HRT? And there's so many things that grind my gears right now on social media. Like I was sharing with her, I saw a reel from, let's call it an influencer, like well-known influencer, I guess, maybe because she has lots of followers. I don't know. I looked at her profile, can't see, like, is she a practitioner? Is she a coach, like macro coach? I don't know. But she had this reel that basically was talking about the years of perimenopause and all the things that happen. And then, of course, it's like comment hormones to optimize your hormones with this $90 supplement a month that keeps you in fat burning for 9.5 hours and magically is going to help with your brain fog and all this other shit that I was like, you're selling false hopes here and dreams. I wish it was that simple. But what we like more importantly than that is if you are somebody who wants to optimize, you're using bioidentical hormones. And when you are using bioidentical hormones, we're always going to recommend that you're working with a provider who is testing things regularly because there are going to be adjustments that need to be made throughout this transition of life in perimenopause, into menopause, postmenopause. Even in postmenopause, there's going to be things that need to be addressed. Looking further at this picture is saying, okay, how do I optimize utilizing these hormones? Get the most out of them? Well, one, I want to calm down my inflammation before I go on these things. I want to look at all the systems of the body. How are my detox pathways? What is my genetic predisposition to? And we're going to talk a little bit about that with testosterone and estrogen, but looking at some of these other things so that you can make the best, most educated, informed consent decision on your hormone replacement therapy. We, of course, partner with Vital Medical. For many of our clients, they support getting them on bioidentical hormones, or we will support our clients having conversations with their doctors to potentially get, prometrium, which is progesterone, estradiol, some cases, testosterone. But when we're on these things, what do we take? What's important to consider? And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
all right, if you're dealing with water retention, you're waking up puffy, your ankles or your wrists are really swollen, or you can't get your rings off, and maybe you're even dragging throughout the day, no matter how much water you drink, there's actually a good chance that you're not actually hydrating properly.
Exactly, because water alone is not enough. You need electrolytes, you need sodium, potassium, magnesium, because those things actually pull water into your cells. Otherwise, you're basically just flushing it out and wondering why you're still tired, you're still bloated, and you're still sluggish.
But here's the thing, most electrolyte supplements out there aren't helping you in any way because a lot of them contain things like natural flavors, food dyes, and maltodextrin, which can irritate your gut. And these things can also spike your blood sugar when you're trying to heal.
That's why we both started using Buoy. It's super simple, just trace minerals and electrolytes in liquid form. No flavors, no colors, no sugar, no sweeteners, and you squeeze it into whatever you are drinking. Water, coffee, tea, smoothies, you name it.
And it's clinically backed by science too. So studies have shown that Buoy helps you hydrate better, 64% better in fact, and that's data coming from key blood and urinary markers, not just marketing fluff. And honestly, you can feel the difference. I've had many clients tell me their digestion's improved, they have less headaches, and they're better energy throughout the day.
And Buoy isn't just for people that go to the gym all the time and sweat a bunch. They actually offer a 35% lifetime discount for anyone that's struggling with chronic illnesses. Things like POTS, Hashimoto's, Crohn's disease, chronic migraines, and every autoimmune condition. They're really committed to making better hydration accessible to people who need it most.
I actually throw it in my coffee every morning because it's such an easy upgrade. You don't even taste it, but you're definitely gonna notice if you miss it.
If you're tired of playing hydration roulette and want something that actually supports your body, you've got to try Buoy. It's honestly one of the simplest ways to feel better faster. We wanted to kind of discuss with going on hormone replacement therapy, our opinions, right? This is not medical advice. This is not like going to blanket statement apply to everyone listening, but from what our experience has been with clients and what we see, we have a lot of friends that are, NPs or MDs. We have a lot of friends that are in this space as well. And what we see from them also, I think that it is good practice to start as low of a dose as possible and ideally start with one, at most 2 hormones at a time. I do not think it is smart to bring in all 3 sex hormones or 4 if someone's adding in like DHEA on top of that at the same time. So by sex hormones, we mean estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA. And so what we typically advise from clients, especially if we're working with clients earlier on, is I typically bring in progesterone first. And something to understand too is one, unfortunately, the toxic environment that we live in today just does not cater great to hormone sensitivity, meaning there are a lot of toxins and chemicals that can basically block receptor sites from your actual hormones getting into them and you feeling your hormones properly. So someone could have very good hormone levels, quote unquote, good hormone levels on labs, but not really feel their hormones very well. And then the other piece is that because of the stress that a lot of people are under on a day-to-day basis with, the pressure of life, business, family, all the expectations you put on yourself, our food quality is really low in general, even if you eat, as high of quality as you can, nutrient density is not there as much. In general, we find that this kind of brings just a natural, unfavorable environment for hormones to thrive in. So a lot of people end up low hormone. And then the population, especially that tries to stay lean all year round. So this does not mean that you have to be like a bodybuilder type lean. This can mean that you are just trying to stay on a smaller end and not really go through periods of like feeding up. And all females are different in terms of their sensitivity level to this. So some females can lose their cycle very easily. Some females can lose their hormones very easily. But like personally, I like staying pretty lean. So I, in general, don't hold very high hormone levels because of that. So I have decided to bring in exogenous hormones through hormone replacement therapy in very low doses to support optimization, right? And so with all of that kind of laying the groundwork, we usually, in a younger population, I typically see it beneficial to bring in progesterone and then potentially testosterone. Mm-hmm. When you're hitting more the menopausal years, then we can discuss estrogen and progesterone, and then maybe testosterone. But if you're under 50, I usually don't see a huge benefit. I see the cons outweigh the pros of adding an estrogen too early. I'm not saying that is everyone. There are some small populations where they can be, life-changing in terms of anxiety, in terms of joint pain, in terms of things that are very low estrogen-based symptoms, but only because technically your ovaries for most people are still creating some level of estrogen at that time. So although you might go through periods of low estrogen, when you add in estrogen consistently, I find that it can actually create worse symptoms in other areas. It's like you solve one problem, you create 4 others. So people maybe, my hot flashes are better, but now I have joint pain, or I have breast tenderness, or I have, bloating, weight gain, whatever it might be. And so it's just a caveat. Again, this is not a blanket statement for every single person. Some people do benefit from estrogen earlier on, but we will say that I think it's smart to start with one at a time because you may have an adverse reaction. And if you put in all 3 at the same time, 1, you don't technically know what that adverse reaction is coming from. 2, it's hard to dose properly and figure out what the sweet spot of that dose should be because, again, you have 3 moving parts and then all the effects that those can create in terms of like downstream effects in the body. And then lastly, you might retain a lot of water because hormones cause water retention in general. And the more you add in, the more mess you might create, especially if you're not in like an optimized state to begin with.
Yeah. So what do we take herbal wise, supplement wise? What do we consider when we're starting these things? So I would agree with Becca on all of that, right? Progesterone. So again, low and slow, I will share with you, my experience was more that I felt like I was in a severe deep sleep. And then it was making like groggy in the morning. And last night, Ethan slept through the night, thank God. But historically, in the last 6 months, I've been trying to regulate my period with progesterone. My doctor prescribed 300 milligrams at night. I was taking 100 milligrams because I'm not an idiot. In that case, I was like, okay, maybe some people out there, but like, why go to 300 when we haven't even tried 100, right? And so now what I've done is I've gotten compounded 50s for the first half of my cycle and 100 in the second half of my cycle, right? When this should rise. I'm a big fan of progesterone. I was taking Progon B prior to getting pregnant with Ethan. I put all of my gals I'm working with in terms of fertility on Progon B because progesterone is what we need to, hold that pregnancy, protect the fetus. So when we think about that, right, we also think about water retention, and potassium comes to mind here. Looking at your sodium to potassium ratio, what do you need? How did your individual body respond with this aldosterone and other hormones that come to play with water retention? So you could put in some natural diuretics. So I think of like green tea or dandelion root, some of those things. And then again, looking at your food, how much processed food are you doing? How much sodium is in that? Sodium to me in processed foods is much different and a lot It's going to act different in the body than when you're taking, like an LMNT, like a mineral salt, right? And again, what are other factors for your body and your health and things that you've been working on? So that would be just something to consider with progesterone. When we get on to testosterone, so there's such a thing called aromatization. If we were to run a Dutch test, we were running a genetics test, we can see, do you have a propensity? It doesn't mean that's actually happening in real life on a genetics test, but do you have a propensity to aromatize your testosterone into estrogen? And this is why we like putting that in, secondary instead of estrogen first, because if you push a little bit of it to estrogen, well, that could tip the curve and make you more estrogen dominant. Also, if you're not on progesterone, right? And so this is really where, when we're looking at testosterone, it's low and slow. It's watching your symptoms. Are you getting oily skin? So Beck and I, both, you've been on testosterone a little longer than I have, but at a higher dose, I was getting oily skin. I don't like that. I have very clear skin. I don't want acne. I dealt with it as a teen, right? I want to keep good, clean, glowing skin. I don't care if my libido was 10,000 and now it's 5,000 because I don't want, and my husband doesn't want acne on my face, right? So we think about that. We think about deepening voice. We think about hair truism, right? You're starting to grow some hairs. And again, so when you back down your dose, you get on the right one that's, proper for you, then those symptoms clear up. But you're also at the same time watching for estrogen dominant symptoms. Okay, did my periods get worse? Did I have more of that joint pain? Did I have some breast tenderness, right? So when we're taking testosterone, I think there's a few things to consider. If you are somebody who aromatizes, absolutely, I think putting something in like a DIM, a calcium diglucarate, sulforaphane can be wise just to help estrogen detoxification. If you're more androgenic, but you want the benefits of testosterone, maybe you need a DHT blocker like a spironolactone, ECGC. If you are somebody who, is on testosterone and you're trying to stop this aromatization, can be more of an herbal support versus spironolactone. I can't say that I've seen it do much for people. And, then again, when we get into the situation where you are on all three or you're on estradiol, you're looking at your clearance of this. How much sulforaphane, calcium diglucarate, or DIM might you need? So these all help estrogen clearance and detoxification in a little bit different ways. So sulforaphane, this is made from like brassica family, but you would have to eat like 4,000 pounds of broccoli or something insane to maybe it's 40 pounds, but it's something insane, right? To get the benefit. So if we're looking at a Dutch test, we see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 detoxification. We see different pathways that you're pushing your estrogen down. The 2-OH is our protective pathway. Then you have your 4-OH, which is more DNA damaging oxidative stress buildup, has been linked in some research to more estrogen-based cancers, things like that. And then you have your 16-OH pathway, which is a little more inflammatory. So we want to balance with these. We don't want everything in the 2-OH, but we certainly want certain ratios. So that's why visually we love the Dutch or the hormone zoomer. The hormone zoomer, I think for me right now, I like it. It's a little more expensive, but it gives us these endocrine disruptors. So if you're having trouble balancing your hormones, why is that, right? What other things are disrupting the communication here? So I do like that one a lot, but it shows us what we might need. If you're high in this 4-OH pathway, we can put the brassica or sulforaphane, sulforaclear, and whatever, and push that down to the 2-OH pathway, the more protective pathway. Then you have calcium diglucarate. So sometimes on stool testing, or if we just know the person's really bloated, right, with their periods or just, things are building up in the body, we're thinking about your estrobolome. There's different bacteria that, act differently in your gut and do different like enzymatic functions based upon this beta glucuronidase marker that we see on a stool test. So if that's high, we can block that activity, that enzymatic activity that lets estrogen kind of recirculate and go wild in the body with calcium diglucarate. A lot of times we'll see that calm down bloating and some of those other symptoms. And then DIM, Beck and I both agree on this. At high levels, it might help in terms of, somebody who's really estrogen dominant, lowering the estrogen. But over the course of the years that we've gone to various seminars and, done more training and education, I'm going to say, okay, DIM, sure, support estrogen detox. But if you're somebody struggling with high estrogen, you need to put progesterone in to balance it out because you're never going to get there with just something like DIM. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, that gets very costly as well. Yep. And so when estrogen's kind of fluctuating, as you were saying before, you're going to have times you're high, you're low, whatever. Progesterone is the nice calming, balancing sister that comes in and says, hey, girlfriend, you're really wild. It's time to go home. You've had too much. Or, hey, let's get you out of the house. Like we need, so progesterone is just really, really impactful. And I think for many people, especially early menopause, mid 30s, early 40s, putting that into place can help a lot with some of those symptoms that we start to see happen because of those estrogen fluctuations and progesterone declining.
Yeah. So DIM also blocks aromatization to an extent. So it keeps more testosterone in testosterone. So it's where you have to kind of be strategic with who you're working with. Are they someone that favors estrogen dominance? And so when you put in testosterone, yes, you might need some DIM to make sure that it doesn't aromatize, right? And the genetic predisposition, the CYP gene that kind of, may increase that aromatization of testosterone flooding into estrogen is a big player. And the other thing to consider is like if you have high body fat content, be really careful with hormones because your body fat itself makes estrogen. Like that's one of the ways that postmenopausal women create higher levels of estrogen and end up with things like breast cancer and, endometrial cancer, uterine cancer, because they are still creating estrogen, but they don't have progesterone to balance the estrogen now because they're postmenopausal, right? And so you have to kind of be careful with the body that you put hormones into. And I think that from all the people that I've seen on hormones, from my personal experience, from doing just research and understanding of it, hormones are an amazing optimizer. And when you put hormones into a body that is a mess, you will probably end up with a bigger mess. Like it needs to be coincidentally alongside diet optimization, inflammation lowering, detoxification support, all of these things, because hormones are just another thing that the body has to process, right? And so they are amazing. They are protective. They are so beneficial. And I'm a huge fan of them, but they are not a golden ticket, right? They are not something that is going to fix all of your problems. And so you really have to be strategic with how you use them and work with someone that is going to push you to do the right things on them and not start you at way too high of doses, not start all of them at once. I don't really believe in that, to be honest. But if you go on hormones, hopefully this is helpful. Absolutely. Progesterone's pretty calm. It's like, it's not going to create a ton of issues unless you go on way too high of a dose. Then you can get bloated, constipated. You can end up with more water retention for sure. But in most scenarios, if you started a little bit of a lower dose, progesterone should be pretty mild in terms of any side effects. I don't really think you need to put in a ton to support progesterone other than what Liz was talking about with hydration and kind of making sure you don't retain too much water. And then we have testosterone. That's where you might put in place, a little bit of DIM, or you might put in place some spironolactone if someone is more predisposed to acne or hair loss or things like that and has that DHT predisposition. And the tricky thing is testing DHT in blood doesn't always give you a picture of what the follicle level is going to experience, right? So like, you might have at your follicle level a sensitivity to DHT. And so even though your testosterone's not high, you're still losing hair, right? Because it's more of a follicle-based issue. And then when you add in the estrogen, absolutely, I think the calcium D-glucarate, I think the sulforaphane are huge supporters. And you really need to know your predisposition in terms of aromatization and methylation abilities, because that will impact how much DIM we might want to put in, or if we want to put in DIM, right? So if you're someone that actually favors testosterone that doesn't aromatize a ton, you may not want to put in DIM because then you're going to keep more of it in testosterone, right? And so saw palmetto might be a better option there to help the testosterone actually get into estrogen, right? So there's a lot of different options here. But at the end of the day, I think absolutely calcium D-glucarate's safe. It's helpful. I think usually in most cases for most women, a little bit of DIM is going to be smart and supportive. And then the last thing is putting in some liver support. Having something that has a little bit of NAC in it or a little bit of milk thistle can be really, really helpful to just keep the liver up to par with all these exogenous things that you're adding in. So diet is important. Hydration is important. Sleep is important. Your lifestyle and environment will never not be important. So do not ignore those things and think that hormones are going to be this magic bullet, because you might be really disappointed.